You've landed on The Substance. I'm your host, Philip Marinello, and I'm here today with my co-host, Vincent Edwards.
Hello.
And Trevor Aiken.
Hey.
We're three guys discussing faith, culture, theology, and hopefully having a good time too while we do it.
Hopefully this is edifying to you guys, makes you think, makes you have something to share and react to these different ideas that we're bringing you.
So this week's show, I was really excited about. I have been a Banner of Truth fan for a long time.
Same.
Trevor, I mean, I remember some of my best memories as a Christian young man being sharpened by other young men were hanging out at Starbucks and Panera going over Puritan paperback books.
So I know it's not Substance Shoutouts, that's at the end, but any like recommendations off the top of the dome that you would go for, like, hey, right now, if you don't have it, you should go out and get this Puritan paperback.
The classic one, most people are probably familiar with, is John Owen's
On the Mortification of Sin.
Yeah, Mortification of Sin. And I've probably either been a part of consuming or been a part of leading discussions through that book, like probably around 3 times where I've gone through that whole book with folks.
Yeah. I'll say too, like, I'm an Owen fan. I've read the 1800s transcript that was like made directly by saying, read the unabridged. And I'll say, of all of the versions of that book that are out there, because there's several publishers that have published On the Mortification of Sin, Banner of Truth's Puritan paperback abridged version of On the Mortification of Sin is the most accessible Owen that's out there. And so it's definitely something that you can pick up, you can read, it's accessible, and it will benefit you spiritually.
And we're not getting paid for this, but I also can't let this go by without also giving a shout out to The Bruised Reed.
Yeah.
The book and the time and the group of guys, like, if I were to pick like one specific perfect like crystal ball moment in my Christian life, is probably going through The Bruised Reed every Saturday morning with you guys in college.
Nice.
Such a good book. It's so what they call him, like the sweet doctor, the heavenly doctor, like such tenderness and wisdom. It was phenomenal. But we're not here to talk about The Bruised Reed or Mortification of Sin.
Kind of in that vein, I mean, he's a little bit after the time of the Puritans.
Sure.
With
J.C. Ryle. Yeah. He's kind of grandfathered in.
Yeah. He's around the same time as Spurgeon, who some people call the last Puritan.
Yeah, so Banner of Truth was nice enough. I connected with them. They were nice enough to send us some of these books. We're going to be going through Thoughts for Young Men today. And at the end of the episode, we're going to be giving details on the giveaway that we're going to be doing on social media, primarily Instagram, I believe. But really, really excited to be talking about this book today.
So kind of give us some background. What is Thoughts for Young Men? Why was it written? Who's the audience here?
So the original audience, and Phil, you correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, the 1800s. So I believe J.C. Ryle was, you said, the bishop in Liverpool, in Church of England. And he just wanted to write something to the young men in his church. And these words that he wrote down and the message that book brings, I think, continues to be relevant to young believers, especially young men.
Well, and on that note, 2 things. One, he was just a pastor. He was a bishop. He was just a faithful man of God in his local church context. And like, this was essentially a tract. I know in our first iteration, we talked about the carpet bombing, like just public places with tracts that are pretty substanceless. And like,
you could probably carpet bomb Thoughts for Young Men and we'd be all right with that.
Yeah, like tracts, it's easy to kind of be flippant about or joke about, but a lot of the great old books, some of those stuff that were in the Puritan paperbacks, they were created not to chart, not to sell, not to go viral, not to turn into audiobooks or courses or conferences. They were created and then printed and disseminated in that area so basically it's kind of like a primitive podcast
to help people.
Yeah. Tracts used to be good.
Yeah.
It's the thing there.
Nice.
So yeah, it's 75 page tract.
Longer.
Yes, it is 75 pages. It's a smaller book. There's chapter breaks and some spaces there. So, I mean, it's about like 60 to 70 pages. It's not too heavy. Other thing I wanted to cover at the top of this is that it's called Thoughts for Young Men. If a listener is either not young or either not a man, why should they listen?
One of the things that stands out to me, I mean, honestly, a lot of this episode is going to kind of be about that, is all the value that is here. But J.C. Ryle is great as just distilling truth. And the wisdom that he has, it is biblical and targeted for youth. And it is targeted, in a sense, for men, but it's just targeted also for humans. Like, the truths are true no matter what gender you are. And they are also relevant whether you are young or not. The time to live wisely is now, whether you are young or not. The thing is, and he jumps in right off the bat on like, hey, why am I talking to youth? Why am I trying to target youth? And talks about the potential that youth have and the particular struggles that you tend to have as well in life. And so targeting it is important, but it's not limiting because the truths and the wisdom are relevant no matter what age you are.
And I also think the aspect is important, right, of the Christian community. My time is not great as far as free time, but I try not to consume stuff just targeted to like 30-something males, fathers, whatever. Like, say you're not young, say you're not a man, like, this is still good stuff because you probably know young men. And you could probably edify them and sharpen them and speak into their lives well with some of this stuff too. Like just the non-individualistic nature that the family of God should have. I think it's also good to be up on things like that for that reason.
Yeah. I think another benefit it brings is just knowing that it's from a different time and therefore culture than today's culture. And the sermons and the books and the things that are designed for youth today, you're going to get what is maybe a fresh perspective for you. Right? You might have already heard what Christianity today and in this culture has to say to youth in a lot of familiar ways. Obviously, you can't exhaust that if people are being biblical. But when you hear something outside of your time and place,
it's like 130 years ago,
you're going to get some fresh insights and thoughts. So that's a lot that you can gain in 70 pages or so.
And that's another nice thing. Part of our whole mission statement is the blending of the timeless and the timely. The stuff he was talking about, it wasn't hip. It wasn't like so fresh, but it was true. Let's dive into it.
Absolutely. So we wanted to just engage with this insight. If we are dealing with sin or vices in our lives, in our youth especially, doing what is righteous and doing what is holy will be relatively easy to do. He's actually destroying that. It's showing us that just because we're young, we can sometimes get pretty prideful in our minds and hearts to say, you know what, I can get rid of that sin later.
It's almost like he's speaking against a kind of spiritual procrastination.
Yeah.
Right? Where it's, I can put off wise living or self-discipline till later.
In a couple portions of the book, he talks about how the idea of praying and fasting and meditation and Bible reading, that's stuff that either children in Sunday school do or old ladies do. Right. That's not something that men who are in the like vital years of their life spend time doing because they're either pursuing pleasure or pursuing success.
And what you're talking about, Vince, and I think that he hits so well, is this assumption that we have.
Yeah.
That it's so easy. It doesn't matter if I waste all this time right now. Like I want to live my best years as wild as I can and as, I guess, quote unquote, fun as I can because I'm young, whatever. And he says, but you're assuming that you can just change course like a snap of the fingers and it's that easy.
Right.
Which very much spoke to me as an Enneagram 7. It always does. Every time I read this book. I've probably read this book 3 or 4 times, and it always gets me like, yeah. Also, when we were talking about the potential for good and evil, when you are young, if you set yourself on the good path positively, it's not just about avoiding sin or avoiding negative consequences. You can be really effective for the Lord. It's just like what's a good way to put it? It's like spiritual compound interest. If you start habits of praying and reading the word and in meditating and in spiritual disciplines, if you started that in your late teens, if you start that in your 20s, when you get serious, by the time you're 40, let's say you start that when you're 20, by the time you're 40, how many times will you have read the word? How much would you have been able to, through conversation, somebody comes to you with something, you're like, oh, like, let me speak wisdom into you as a 40-year-old versus like the wise old sage in their 60s, 70s, 80s. Like, you can redeem those years so much if you take them seriously when you're young.
And I'm a witness to the idea of thinking that to be a faithful Christian at a young age is not fun, and it's taking away, like, I'm not thinking about the long game, and I'm guilty of it. I sincerely had thoughts of like, I don't want to get saved right now because I listened to, my family talk about, oh, I was wild and I did this and then I did that and then the Lord saved me, and I was like, well, they had their fun and then they got saved, so that's the trajectory. So I'm not thinking about long term. I'm not thinking about the long game. I'm not thinking about, like you said, that spiritual compound interest. I'm just thinking about right now. I just want to have fun because I am making the strong assumption, one, that I'm going to even see tomorrow.
Sure.
And then second, that I'm going to easily correct if I go and be wild and have kind of just a moral or ethical displacement, that I'm just going to be able to place it back in line.
And I think one of the things that's so powerful there is like two things. One, kind of on the negative or the harsh or the caution side, is God never designed his grace to enable sin. He gives grace freely, and he is tender towards sinners, towards the brokenhearted, towards those who come to him and are struggling and are failing. That said, he has never given his grace in a way that's such that like you can presume on it and say, well, it'll just be available freely whenever, and so I just live however I want right now.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, on the beautiful side, on the goodness side, on the enticement side is, and this is why we loved John Piper's Desiring God, which is not the book we're talking about today, but like the life lived for God is joyful and fulfilling.
It is satisfying.
Yes.
God made us for himself.
Yeah.
He designed us when we are living according to his will, according to the good works that he has set up for us. That is the most satisfying in human terms. That is the most fun like that one could have.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean it's easy.
No.
And it doesn't mean it's always
fun almost seems like it's not
the
appropriate.
right word.
I like satisfaction.
Yeah.
Like enjoy.
Because it equips you for the realities, the depth of life, that you can get all the richness out of the grief of life and the joy of life and find meaning in all the highs and the lows that life offers, instead of just numb yourself to all the pain through, alcohol and loud music or whatever, and try to just live on this high by getting rid of this part of my life or pretending it doesn't exist. Well, that always catches up with you. But a life lived satisfying for God, like, understands those things, incorporates those things, and has support through the grace of God and the community of God through those things.
Yeah, one of the famous quotes from the book, and it ends so good. He says, "Young men, be not deceived. Think not that you can, at will, serve lusts and pleasures in your beginning, and then go on to serve God with ease at your latter end. Think not that you can live with Esau and then die with Jacob."
Man.
Heavy.
He's so good with those little statements
that
just stick with you.
It's like that's like a very good tweet.
Yeah.
Think not that you can live with Esau and die with Jacob.
Okay, so here's the assignment. Anybody listening to this, when you read the J.C. Ryle book, you find your favorite J.C. Ryle quote and you tweet it. It'll be a good tweet because you tweeted something smart. and then you can tag the substance.
Tag the substance.
Yep.
It is public domain. We will be giving away some books, but this book is also just out there.
Yeah, it's good.
Man, and I love the fact that it really brings to light the fact that it's hard work. That's the reason why we call it the narrow way or the narrow gate.
Mm-hmm.
And so we also want to make it clear, like, and I think J.C. Ryle made it very clear that what we're not saying is that, like you said, in order to follow the Lord, it's easy. It's actually not easy, because there's a lot of dying to self. There's a lot of denying oneself. There's a lot of suffering and those kinds of things are guaranteed to the life of the believer.
Yeah.
But it's that scripture, who can separate us, or what can separate us from the love of Christ? And it has this list of all of these things, all these sufferings, all these bad things that could happen, or at least as we see them as bad. Sometimes it's hard to see it as sanctifying, and it's like nothing can. There's nothing more satisfying than the love of God, even if there's some travail to go through it.
Yeah. At the end of the day, like, you only get every moment that you have one time. You don't get to go back. There is no rewind button for these years of your life.
Right.
And so I think that is something that Ryle taught me. Just going back through this, listening to it again, just was reminded that this whole kind of notion of live like I'm dying, like live like this moment matters ultimately, because I don't know. I don't have guaranteed to me years and years. I don't have like, I want to live in such a way that if I died tomorrow, I'd be happy with how I've spent my life. And it's not about just like going out there and having a good time because life is short and enjoy the most of it. That's part of it. But like doing things that are worthwhile and recognizing the brevity of life, recognizing that nothing is guaranteed to you. And I love what you said earlier, Philip, the spiritual compound interest. All of it matters. All that work that you're putting in, it matters. One, it matters to the heart of God, but two, it does strengthen your soul. It makes you wiser.
Pragmatically, spiritual realities are not divorced from physical realities, because God made it all. He's orchestrating it all. But like, everybody knows this to be true, positively and negatively. If you eat well, it's easier to eat well. If you eat poorly, it's easier to eat poorly. If you get into the habit of exercising, it's easier to continue exercising. If you are in the habit of exercising, you take a day off, it's easy to take the next day. Like, whatever it is you're pursuing to do, the more you do that, the easier it becomes and the harder it becomes to break those habits. So why would we want to, in the youth of our life, when we have, he talks in the book, when you are young, you have the most ability to both learn and to exert yourself for the sake of the Lord. So if you're like, I'm going to give all that stuff to myself to pursue like lusts and enjoyments and pleasures and just my own jam, then later on in life, like, that's going to be the way you're programmed. Like, God is gracious. You could still come to the Lord, sure, but it's going to be harder. You're going to be like, you're just grieving yourself. It's not, like you said, it's easy to buy the lie unexamined, but you're not living a better life.
Right.
Yeah.
It's actually just feeding oneself to the bondage and slavery of sin.
And that's why, like, Ryle wants to target young men. I wanted to read this quote from early in the book. He says, "Young man, I want to save you all this sorrow if I can. Hell itself is truth known too late."
Oof.
He says, "What youth sows, old age must reap. Give not the most precious season of your life to that which will not comfort you in your latter days." That's just good truth.
It's a heavy hitter too, because it's just like, dang, man, I was not thinking like this 10 years ago. And you also sometimes can think about the potential, like, man, if I had just done that when I was younger, where my life would be now. And it's not one where it's self-loathing or anything like, oh, well,
No.
now that I'm older, I'm just going to abandon those things. But it's definitely just to reflect, to say thank you, Lord, for the time that you have given me now. Let me do something with it.
Yeah, it's not, it doesn't preclude God from making good things happen. It's just, what people do when they do that, they're just they're just closing themselves off to more benefit.
Yeah. And once again, no matter what age you're at, the time to start is now. Investing in your soul, investing in the kingdom, the time to start is now. But especially for youth, you have the early years of your life set aside by society for you for education or self-improvement.
Kind of wildly, especially
learning.
In America.
Yeah. So if you're young, if you are still in your early 20s, that kind of time, if you're single,
man, if you are either single or don't have children, you don't know how much time you have.
Yeah, just the kind of time that you have to be able to really dive in. And I mean, that was one of the things that stood out to me about my man Vincent, was just
what's
watching
it like
you.
having all that time?
Yeah. Well, but honestly, seeing you going hard after theology and going hard after learning the things of the Lord and really trying to refine yourself. And I'm like, that's what I want for all our listeners, is for young folks to make the best use of time like that, because that will pay dividends later when you might not have as much time to do those things. So you got to get it in while you can. And obviously throughout your life, you have time for the things you prioritize, but it just does get crowded.
Yeah.
So what else we want to highlight about what Ryle has written here?
So along with the potential for good and evil, there is young folks. He highlights young men, but this is true for youth in general. He highlights how young folks tend to lack self-awareness because of their youth. So, I mean, when you're young, statistically, unless an emergency or an accident, something outside of the norm of regular occurrences happen,
catches your attention,
you have something outside of the normal course of events happen, you're 20, the average American lifespan is 86. You got time ahead of you, worldly speaking. So it can be easy to lack that self-awareness of eternity's at hand. The imminence of eternity could happen at any point. Your heart could stop. Who knows? There's a million different what ifs.
Yeah.
But because statistically, when you're in your teens and 20s, you got 60, 70 years ahead of you.
Right. But it is this is the life that you have been given, and you're building it right now. And we thank you that you're spending it with us right now, getting some wisdom hopefully from Ryle. But that is the reality, and the sooner that you're aware of that reality, that you grasp onto that reality, that this is happening right now, this is important, I got to engage it.
With the investing portion, Ryle has a quote here where he says, by the shoot, he's talking agricultural metaphor, by the shoot, we judge of the tree. By the blossoms, we judge of the fruit. By the spring, we judge of the harvest, and by the morning, we judge the day. And by the character of the young man, we may generally judge what he will be when he grows up. So if you are living carefree, just like we said about exercising your health or what have you, if you, without any self-awareness, without any active planning or purposeful disciplines or creations in your life, if you don't act purposefully in your life, that carelessness will continue to characterize you until, sadly, it's too late and you waste your life, or graciously, God kind of busts in there and gives you some sort of self-awareness.
Yeah, and I think the good thing about being self-aware, or at least the thing that can be sometimes missed when we're not being self-aware, is when we do one day meet God. The account of our life will be on display in front of a judge who is not only purely holy, but purely fair. And so
we're going to have to actually give an account to a judge who literally knows everything.
Every single thing. And so it's worth considering, where do I stand in the eyes of God in light of the scripture?
Yeah.
That's a fair thing. And it's a good thing, like you said. for trajectory's sake to consider that at a younger age. Wherever you realize it, to realize it is a good thing, because that's a real reality. It's a stark one, and it's like, dang, okay. But it's a real one that does no benefit to us to ignore.
Yeah. Many philosophers and theologians have talked about the importance of living an examined life, of knowing yourself, really devoting thought to your life. And Ryle also has some words on this point, and I wanted to share some of those. He says, "Believe me, this world is not a world in which we can do well without thinking. Don't think, whispers Satan. Consider your ways, says the word of God." And I love what he says here. Just like somebody can do something wrong and say, "I never gave it a thought." So young men run into sin and then say, "I didn't think about it. It didn't look like sin." Not look like sin? What would you expect? Sin won't come to you saying, "I am sin." It would do little harm if it did. Sin always seems good and pleasant and desirable at the time of commission. Oh, get wisdom, get discretion. And it's hard to characterize an entire generation, but I'm encouraged whenever I see very thoughtful people who are thinking through things, who are considering the world, who are reading up. They're reading up on history. They're reading up on science. They're reading up on things that are going on in the world. They're reading up on that.
And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Like the don't think versus consider dichotomy.
Yeah.
We're trying to be a voice for that. Like, to you guys, the listeners.
Absolutely. And one thing that has to get put into that basket, which in a generation that does think more, I do wonder sometimes if we don't think more about the scriptures along the way, though. Like if we've really considered the fullness of what the Bible says, what it means, taking it in its full balance as well, because this is the authoritative and internally relevant written revelation from an all-wise God. And so if you want wisdom, if you want discretion for how to navigate and discern this life and to think well about it, that is the place that you're going to want to go to. But to do that as you're doing all the things too, like the don't think on the one hand versus consider your ways on the other hand, that applies universally so much. So I think Ryle's advice there is super timely and super, super wise as well, and worthy to be heeded.
Written in the late 1800s, I don't think that will ever be not true or out of date.
Absolutely. And so we want to think about specifically the power of sin.
For sure.
And though, yes, absolutely 100%, God, through Jesus Christ, has paid the debt for his people and for their sins. And so sometimes it can be easy to just say, oh, well, sin is taken care of. And that's it. And so all we need to do is just obey and be holy. But it's worth considering the vice of sin and its deceptive grips on certain areas of our lives. What are your guys' thoughts?
There's a metaphor Ryle uses, super simple. I'm sure plenty of the listeners who have been to church and have listened to sermons for any length of time have heard the analogy before, but he uses the metaphor of a boulder to describe sin rolling down the hill. So the farther it goes down the hill, the more momentum it gets, right? So if you're going to say, I'm going to let sin go until I'm 40, 50, and I'm 20 now, it's got 20 years of momentum. God is all powerful. God spoke the world into existence and holds it together with his strength. He can do anything.
Right.
But are you daring, like you're kind of daring God, you're testing his patience, you're testing his grace. Why would you do that?
That's like when if it's snowed and it's icy out on the road and you see that cars are stopped in front of you, you're not going to run up on them like it's a summer day and slam on the brakes at the last minute just to see, maybe I won't slide, like maybe I'll make it.
Yeah, you shouldn't.
No, you're going to start braking early on, and that's the thing. Like you don't want to have that momentum going. You're going to take action earlier if you're wise. And this is not, once again, like sin does not equal fun. Sin does not equal enjoyment. God made life to be beautiful, to be full, to have integrity and to have enjoyment in the goodness that he offers. And when we live into that, we are able to, one, be productive, but also enjoy the context that he's placed us in a way that brings wholeness to our life instead of brokenness.
And I can definitely speak to the deception of sin. Because I was a young person, like I said, and I thought, getting saved was something you do, like it's intended to be something that you do later. Being a faithful Christian of God is something you do later. And sin was enticing because I grew up in a church culture where they very villainize sin. And it's like sin is bad, sin is wrong, it's corrupting, it'll get you. But it's like, but it is enticing. It masquerades itself as joy and fulfillment and substantial in a person's life and heart. And even though it's like drinking salt water, and ultimately you're gonna be dehydrated, even though you can lap it up all day, you're probably gonna die from thirst.
Well, like the C.S. Lewis quote, like the kids playing in the mud, because they don't understand what like their parents truly have for them. And I mean, and listeners, like real talk directly to you, we know that sadly, plenty of churches, church traditions, leadership, they don't teach this. They do teach rules. So, I mean, if there's any specific questions or things you want to interact with us, send that. Because, like, we know. We've experienced that some. Like, I remember I went to, not in any prideful way, like, I went to a pretty good church that esteemed the Bible very highly. It was a really good church. The leadership cared about truth. They cared about us. But I also remember, and it was due to John Piper, when I picked up Desiring God, where it kind of clicked. It's like, oh, like God really wants me to be satisfied and fulfilled and like happy, like, and not in a superficial way, but in a true way. God wants us to be happy. Heaven is a place of joy. Because that is where we fully live out and actualize what it means to exist and to be human.
Yeah, absolutely. And Paul talks about how in Romans chapter 7, he talks about how sin works in our hearts so that when we hear about something that's sinful, our heart says, man, I think I'd do that thing. Like
that sounds like fun.
And he says that actually just shows how evil, deceptive, and sinful sin is, and how harmful it is. And so that is a warning to
plug
understand
for sinfulness of sin as well. Also another very good one.
Yeah. I mean, even just the title, you think about that for a second, like that is good stuff. So yeah, Ryle has a good section talking about the power of sin in there too, also talking about, and I think this is important, the more that we see Christ, the more we get a clearer view of what the standard is, which is Jesus Christ and his heart for people and his compassion and his humble power, right? Not lording it over power, but his life of service and the power of his character and witness. Like that shows us what sin is as well, because you see it aligned against him. You see it in the cost of his cross and what it meant to pay for sin. You see it in the way that he is dealing with the layers of sin on his disciples' minds. They're trying to understand what it means to actually live for God. And the more you get a clear picture of Jesus and what true beauty is in that sense, the more you see the ugliness of sin.
Yeah, we were talking about that the other day. Like when a Christian is living in light of the word, they're growing in their knowledge of the word, they're a part of a vitally connected community, when they are engaging in acts of service with one another in their community evangel. Like sin is not attractive. Sin doesn't seem like, ooh, I want that. Because it's like, no, I am. Even though I'm fallen, I'm still living in this world, it's imperfect. Like I'm tasting and seeing and I'm experiencing the good things that God has for me. And like sin's gonna like take me away from that. Like I don't want that.
Right. And so I think that's a good corrective for people who may be in those communities where it is just, welcome to the First Christian Church meeting. Here are the rules.
Yeah.
And,
well-meaning. I'm sure a lot of those folks
Yeah.
are well-meaning.
And I'm sure the Pharisees in Jesus' day were too, as they did the exact same thing.
Sure.
But they missed the person of Jesus. And if you want a clear picture of sin and clearly understand the difference between that and righteousness and what that means for life, get a picture of Jesus Christ and trust in what he says is truth. Follow his life as your example, and that is going to get you on the right direction.
Absolutely. And it's just like you said, the beauty of the gospel is something that really brings it's juxtaposed to the weight and what some would say deadliness of sin.
That's right.
Because it's like, if it cost that much,
Sure, yeah.
then my goodness, why am I trifling with this thing or these things? And it's not to say that we don't fall. It's not to say that, we don't struggle sometimes, because like you said, Phil, we are fallen human beings.
Sin daily. We fall short of God's holiness daily.
Every single day. And so it's not this sinless perfectionism once we're just like so close to the Lord that our holiness is just like...
We certainly reject perfectionism as a heresy.
But it does say that as we continue through this life to be sanctified, that the more, like you said, we taste and see what is actually good, then when we see something that's pretending to be healthy and fruitful, it actually starts to be like, no, I can see through that, and that actually doesn't look great.
Yeah. Maturity isn't not having any meaningful struggles or failures, but it's understanding, believing, and holding fast to the fact that we have a merciful and sympathetic high priest who has invited us in the veil so that we can stand before God, who sees us as righteous as the Son, as Christ, and living in the newness of life because of that. That's what it really means. And that's not going to be the perfect life or even just struggle-free life, but it's going to be a grace-filled life.
Very much so. And the other main theme that we kind of identified in there, Ryle hammers many times very effectively that young people need to be reminded of eternity. Yes, it's important what we do with our lives, but also in light of eternity, our lives are a speck.
Yeah.
Our lives are important. Our lives set us up for eternity.
I think there's two reasons today why a lot of people struggle with this whole idea of eternity. One thing being that people just don't believe it exists, for one.
Okay.
Which that is a struggle. And I'd say once again, like, think about the things that that God who became man and really lived on this earth. Think about the things that he said. Think about the things he said is important. And that's all of his word in the scriptures. But dwell on that because he has the truth. He knows the truth. And nobody else can tell you what that other side looks like except Jesus, who's been there, really. But then the second thing just being that people have seen the lives of Christians who say they live for eternity, who say they're all about the next world. But what that tends to mean for them is that, well, God's got all of it for me. And so who cares about this world? Who cares about really the people in this world? It seems like I just got mine in eternity. And so I'm just living my little inner pious life. And meanwhile, like, really not caring for the people around me except to say, hey, you should believe in Jesus too so you can get it good on the other side.
Yeah.
And is that, I don't even, that's not what Ryle is talking about.
No, not at all.
Living for eternity.
No, just having an eternity awareness throughout your life is what he was focusing on.
Yeah, because I think it goes to almost the inevitability that death will come. And that's also, I probably would add that as a third point of why eternity is hard to think about, because it's how do you get to eternity? You got to die. And
it's not not our favorite thing.
Most people don't like thinking about it.
Right. Most people don't like thinking about death because it's a hard thing to think about, because it's like, as real as I am here now is the reality that I am going to close my eyes in death one day.
100% of people are going to do it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that could be mad uncomfortable. Very, very, very uncomfortable. And so it's just like, you know what? I'm not trying to think about it, even though I know that it's real. So I'm just going to live for today.
I mean,
that's it.
How many preachers and authors and speakers and writers, like, throughout the years, like, yeah, we will all metaphorically or literally, like, lie on our deathbeds one day.
Mm-hmm.
How will we have lived our life, and, like, where will we be going? Like, those are the most important things that there are. There's nothing more important than that.
Yeah, I'm just looking through and seeing this quote here that I've underlined. Consider, is it better to basically live an idle, frivolous, useless, prideful life, or to spend and be spent in the glorious cause of usefulness to your fellow men? Like,
usefulness. He wasn't twiddling our thumbs,
yeah,
trying to get better theology until we die, not caring about this world.
No, and like that's what drove him to write this work and to caution young people and to tell young people, like, there is a glory that is entrusted to you in your life and how you can use it, and you can live in a way to glorify the Lord in that, or you can waste it.
Yep.
So don't waste it.
Absolutely. And it's just that continued reality that regardless of what theology, area of theology that you land or whatever, whichever worldview that you subscribe to, there's a universal reality of death.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's to be considered. Now, obviously, it's definitely not one where there's probably a concern if all you're thinking about is death every single day. And it's not even just like the eternity aspect, but it's like fear that I'm gonna die.
Right.
But more of saying, you know, since I will meet the Lord, I do want to make sure that the life that I've lived, the life that he granted off of the merit of his love alone, not because we did anything to say, God, yeah, you better give me some life. No, it's he did it because he wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And so because life in and of itself is a gift, we then say, what statement do we make with this gift? Because it's just like if I gave you a leather coat, like top of the line leather coat. I mean,
thanks, bud.
We're talking about
Christmas
next
coming
level.
up.
Hey, listen.
You're young. You don't have kids yet. You're not spending all that money on them.
So if I give you this leather coat,
Uh-huh.
and how you show that you are grateful for it is treating
Put it in the back of my car, right?
No, exactly. You
Throw it in the
don't.
back
You
seat?
don't do that.
Mm-mm.
You treat it well. You don't just say, "Yeah, I just got a whole bunch of mustard on it. I had a hot dog, whatever, and I'm not gonna wash it or take it to the cleaners or whatever." However, you get a authentic leather coat clean. You don't say that
Professionally.
right. You say, because I've been given something that is of high value, of high quality.
For
I
sure.
take care of this thing. That's what life is. It's of high value. It's of high quality that God has given on the merit of his love. How do we best treat this thing called life, and we honor him with it?
It's good.
For sure.
So, fair to say, in the lingo of the kids nowadays,
Jeez. Uh-oh.
I mean, we stand the J.C. Ryle Thoughts for Young Men book
Oh, boy.
pretty heavy.
Oh, boy.
Am I right? But there's some things in it. Is there anything?
If listeners could see the face Vince just made after Trevor said that.
Continue, please.
Is it? Would we
recommend this book?
Is there anything? Yeah, I mean, would we
I
recommend
forgot
it?
about
Is there
this part.
anything in
Yes.
there that we would not recommend? Is there anything that we say, a little caution on this?
Yeah, a couple pushbacks. Why don't you hit yours, Trevor, and I'll find mine.
So I know one thing that stood out to me on this listen through, there is especially in thoughtful Christianity and mystical Christianity, there is a emphasis sometimes overly on the soul in exclusion of the body. And Ralph says this: your body was only intended to be a house for your never-dying spirit. It is flying in the face of God's purposes to do as many do, to make the soul a servant to the body, and not the body a servant to the soul. And so the theological reality is that you are both a body and a soul. You are not just a soul that happens to have a body, a soul that's housed in a body. That is not correct.
Yeah, if you listen to our social justice episode, Jesse Eubanks destroyed that Gnostic heresy.
Yeah, he did. Totally took it to task. And so I'm a little concerned. I feel like there are some parts in the book that seem to be tinged with that thinking. And so I just be careful with that. I think the upshot of it is that we aren't just minds with bodies. We aren't just lives with bodies, but God made us holistically as a body with a soul, we are to use our body for God. The body has the bodily needs. It has everything that goes along with having a body, the stresses and the joys and everything about being a person. But that's what it means to be human. And
That's
God
the design.
intended it that
That's
way.
the design. The physical and the spiritual are not at odds.
Yes.
God made them both together. We are to minister physically. We are to minister spiritually. We are to live physically. We are to live spiritually.
And not to labor that point long, but I mean, you see that the first man, Adam, made that way, perfect. The last man, Christ, resurrected body. He sat with the disciples. He ate with them. He ate fish for breakfast.
Gross.
And showed them like, hey, yeah, I eat. Like, I'm not some weird spirit thing. And John was very specific to include that. So I just think that we have to be careful sometimes with this. That
not to accidentally or wrong-headedly denigrate the body.
Yeah, and I think that goes into some of the things that even you were talking about, honestly.
So I'll read the section here. This kind of thinking popped up a couple of points, but he distills it. He says, go take your fill of earthly pleasures if you will, but you'll never find your heart satisfied with them. Better be wise in time. Better write poison on all earthly pleasures. And I'm like, oh my
what do
God.
you mean by earthly pleasures? Like, if you mean sin by that, yes. But God made pleasure.
Yeah, and I'm thinking particularly Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. More Proverbs than Ecclesiastes, but where it exalts like the good things God made for us. Ecclesiastes 11 says, rejoice, O man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart in the sight of your eyes. But know for all these things that God will bring you into judgment.
Thank you, not Solomon.
We're going to do an episode on Ecclesiastes someday. That'll be good.
But yeah, I mean, in the Word, it talks about enjoying the things of this life that God made to be enjoyed, but all like in light of God.
Yeah.
It doesn't say like be ascetic.
Right.
Like
very much.
Actually, it says not that thing very much.
it doesn't say reject or disown pleasures.
No.
And that's the whole thing that Piper's message in Desiring God clicked for me, because it wasn't told to me exactly, hey, Philip, to honor the Lord, you have to not have fun. But like, it was just not, I was not given the full picture.
Well, and I think that's where you get into, I think that's where it does tie into we're just a soul that happens to have a body rather than we are body and soul, because when you divorce those things, you lose some of the things of culture, which is why we bring them together here on the Substance. The things of art, the things of poetry, the things of film, like the things of painting.
God made our senses. God allows us to enjoy a beautiful sunset or a beautiful painting or beautiful prose or a great song or like God made food. God made taste buds. Like our bodies, like if our bodies were just vehicles for our spirits, we needed our bodies to do righteousness.
There's no point for it. Yeah.
We don't need taste buds.
You can't approach art and beauty with the question, well, what's it for?
What's it do?
Yeah, what's it do? What's its utility? It doesn't answer those questions. And so we have to be careful. God didn't make us to like for only utilitarian things. He didn't make us to shut down everything outside of pure utility. And so we have to be careful on that side that we don't run our life in such a way that is that way, because it cuts off the real humanity, the real embodiedness that Christ himself was not afraid to fully embrace as a perfect God and man together. So just a good caution in there, word of caution on that side that nothing, and this is true about everything, nothing outside of the word of God is 100% God's revealed truth.
Yeah, and don't hear us nitpick him going, oh, we love this book. We think it's phenomenal. These are just two things that
we stand it heavy.
I don't even, jeez. These are just two things that stuck out to us both on our most recent go through, where it's like, hey, like, I don't think that he necessarily got that part right. That's fine.
And it's definitely a balance, because it's definitely not one where we're saying idolize pleasures.
Or idolize the body.
Yeah, or idolize the body.
Or idolize the substance.
Yeah. I mean, just playing. No, but it's one where it says there's a balance. Like, we were just talking about this earlier. about the blessing of alcohol. That's there's positive affirmation in scripture to alcohol, but then there's also the warnings of drunkenness.
Same with food and sex and money and all the things that God made.
These are all things that God made, and all things that God made with the intention to be engaged in.
It can be used well or poorly.
Right. And so that it's orienting those pleasures and the things that we do in a way that seeks to still honor and glorify God. And just be wise and discerning in how we engage in those things.
That's right. Good.
So all that to say, Thoughts for Young Men by J.C. Ryle.
Fire.
Wonderful, timeless resource. Public domain. Check it out. Google it. But you can be looking out. Again, thank you to Banner of Truth. We're going to have 3 copies that we are giving away. You can check us out on Instagram. The week following the release, we'll be running a contest. The last one was great. We got some great interactions on that last one.
Absolutely.
Shout out to Matt and Chelsea. Congratulations. Good job. We hope you enjoy your books. But yeah, so we got some books to give away, so look out for that.
Hey, so we got some stuff we want to shout out. I know we missed this segment a couple times.
I think we missed it once, and I'm actually thinking that whenever you get to editing that episode, because we're recording ahead,
you're going to make me throw stuff in there?
We can just chop it up, throw some stuff in there.
What you shouting out today?
So my substance shout out this week is actually a comic book. I don't think I've done that before.
Not yet.
Okay.
Big comic book fan, and this...
I'm surprised you haven't shouted out a comic book
episode. I don't know what our...
I feel like he for sure has.
I haven't. I tell you guys about comics all the time.
Godzilla one.
He did a
I've
Batman
not done
one,
a Batman. I've maybe talked to you in real life conversations. I don't think I've shouted out any actual comic books before.
Okay.
Sorry.
Quick fact check, but
so
go ahead.
This episode, pretty sure this episode will come out before Christmas, but it's a book that came out recently in collected form from DC called Superman Smashes the Klan. Superman Smashes the Klan was an old radio drama.
Like the Ku Klux Klan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
It's a comic book adaptation of an old radio show. There was, when Superman was big on TV, it was also a radio show. They did a multi-week segment called Superman Smashes the Klan.
Correct, Klan.
Two Jewish dudes created Superman, and they just wanted to get some socially conscious stuff in there. So they did a radio play. It was super popular and also super controversial at the time. And then earlier this year, cartoonist Gene Luen Yang did a 3-part, I think, adaptation of it. Super, super great. It's out on physical form, kind of as a smaller version of a comic. It looks like a YA smaller book. Also, shout out to Hoopla. We got to get Hoopla to sponsor the show for all the stuff we...
How does that work?
I'll talk to Hoopla's people. Send them a message. Send them an email. You can read it free on Hoopla. It's a wonderful gift for anybody, I would imagine, like 8 and up who can read. Really great little story. Great message. Great art. Simple good stuff. Are you still seeing if I've ever shouted out Batman before?
Yep.
I have not done that.
Okay.
So yeah, Superman Smashes the Klan. Really fun book. Really wonderful book. Also, great Christmas gift. Surprise a young person in your family with that.
Nice.
Boom.
Well, my substance shout out this week is going to be Mike Winger from Bible Thinker. Mike Winger,
Bible Thinker.
Mike Winger, Bible Thinker.
Bada bat.
So, Mike Winger is I would say he's an apologist, YouTube apologist. He has a YouTube channel where he just does very practical apologetics. He's a good teacher. He likes to go slowly and make sure that anybody in their walk of life or in their walk with the Lord will be able to understand things that could be difficult if you were just introduced to it. So I love his content on like certain other religions, other cults, new ones as well as the older ones.
New cults?
Yeah. Not their theology's pretty old, but their presentation of those can be a little new. So I recommend his content on those. There's obviously a few areas like on Calvinistic theology or Reformed theology and apologetics as far as evidential versus presuppositional that I would disagree with, but not recommend to at least watch. So I think overall, BibleThinker.org or Mike Winger Bible Thinker on YouTube is a great resource just for your run-of-the-mill, very good, very well done apologetics.
Boom.
Nice.
All right, I stand corrected. It was the Batman animated series that you shouted out.
Oh, yeah. It was just
That was
in our first go around.
I think that might have been our first shout out. I was shouting out a podcast back then. I'm shouting out a podcast now. The Pantsuit Politics podcast. Heard this recommended through Love Thy Neighborhood. And the idea is that was two ladies. One was more conservative in politics. One was more liberal. And they just started kind of chatting and then having a real conversation and turned it into a podcast. And they've just put out some really great stuff. Check out whatever's newest from the Pantsuits Politics podcast. They are putting in some good work and have a very listenable and also very well-rounded political show.
I have not listened to their show yet, but I think I follow them. The Substance follows them on Instagram, and I've seen some of their Instagram live videos and some of their snippets of content, and it's very listenable and very enjoyable.
And I know this is going to get kind of into it, but I'll say the episode that I'm recommending, the one I've been listening through right now, is Why We're Voting for Joe Biden. I know this is coming out after the election, so this is not about persuading anybody one way or the other, but I think it's still going to be important to see those fundamental reasons, to understand what's going on there, and to think through things no matter what the outcome of the election is, to go through those issues and think through the things like they're thinking through them. They've done a pretty good job. So
awesome.
Pantsuit Politics, check it out.
Dope.
So if you like the show and want to support the Substance, one of the chief things that you can do is, if you enjoyed the show and it made you think, share those thoughts somewhere. Share them with a friend through a text message. Share it online on your Facebook or your social media. And when you do, mention the Substance.
Tag us. Let us know, especially on a given episode. If it's this episode or another episode, say, hey, I listened to this episode and it made me think about this. And then tag us so that we can see your thoughts when you post it. And then also if a discussion pops off with your connections, we'd love to see how that goes and maybe jump in there with you.
To us, success in the show, a lot of it is about people thinking new thoughts, thinking deep thoughts. And so honestly, if you're just sharing those, even if it's to disagree with us heavily, tag us in it.
Hey,
we'd love to see it.
We know that we're not right about plenty of things. Like, if you got some thoughts for us, we'd love it if it was done in love, but let us know. Tag us.
Absolutely. And if you want to connect with us directly or get a part of this Substance community, you can check our social media accounts.
Yep, we're on all the above mentioned ones. And if you want to send us a specific question that we can cover on the show, our email is thesubstancepod@gmail.com, or you can leave a voicemail at 913-703-3883.
Boom. You could also, if you wanted to support financially because you really love the Substance, I mean, if you were like standing it heavy, then...
Oh, jeez, how many are we going to do with that? And this episode is a particular good one for that. This is still very part-time for us. You may think, oh, it's $5, $10, $20. Every time somebody sends us $5, $10, whatever, it really does mean a lot. It's like today, with this episode, we're doing that book giveaway. We're paying to ship those books out. It's not a ton, but we've got a number of other book giveaways. We got other things we're doing. That all costs. So anything you send our way, Cash App is $the Substance Pod. That all helps out.
Yep. So thank you guys for listening today, and
we'll see you later on The Substance.
guaranteed to me years and years. I don't have I want to live in such a way that if I died tomorrow, I'd be happy with how I've spent my life.
Just like the country song.
And don't even. Just cut that, Jack.
What's the country song?
Live like you were dying.
That's the tag right there.
So,